Welcome to the SecuPi webinar, talking about them. With me is Paul Weston. Paul, maybe you can introduce yourself?
Well, and thank you very much. I appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been had the pleasure of meeting Alon and his team several months ago, and let me share my background a little bit to you that are joining, and then that'll explain kind of why I'm here and why I've cemented a relationship with Alon and the folks at SecuPi, great folks at SecuPi. So I've been in the information security business for quite a long time now, starting back in actually 2000. Hard to believe that because I know I look so young, but it was first in password management. And then from there, I was recruited over to join a small startup in Waltham, Massachusetts, and in Israel called Guardium, which hit the market at the right time with one of the early editions of the database activity monitoring. And those of you that know this business in this space, a couple of things happened, and one of the blessings in disguise was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the U.S. Congress became a law in the U.S. that helped drive more attention, more interest in database activity monitoring, DAM, and that was pushed along by a variety of other things, including PCI, as well as some massive data breaches at the time, which were renowned and still stand on their own. And of course, there's been so many more since then. But that was my first exposure to database activity monitoring, that business, and was running the North American sales as VP for Guardium, and really got to understand the marketplace and the importance of database activity monitoring and security around all that relates to data. And ended up, as many of you would know, Guardium was acquired by IBM after several years in business, and I ended up staying with IBM as the business unit executive of Guardium for North America for Guardium, and then which was the foundation of IBM Security, actually, and the growth from there. Back about 7 years ago, after the extended time at IBM, I left the IBM business and Guardium business, but I stayed very closely in touch with the industry and was an advisor and consultant for multiple companies in the space for several years. And I also joined academia as well as higher ed as a professor and then dean of continuing studies at a small college outside of Massachusetts, but still stayed in touch and been part of, looked at, interested in, talked about a lot of different companies in the space. But since I've become aligned and met Alon and others in his organization, really found what I feel is really the next generation in total data security, but also database activity monitoring as part of that. And so we, kind of joined forces. And then this webinar today is really kind of the kickoff for that relationship, so to speak. And I'm pleased to be able to be here today and also to share with you some of the really relevant and important aspects of SecuPi and their product offerings. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox here and turn it back over to Alon Rosenthal, one of the founders and the CEO of SecuPi.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, pleasure doing this webinar with you. My journey is, in a quiet sense, parallel to yours. I've been also doing data security for the last 15 years. The dynamic masking notion, something that I invented back in the days, had my first company also acquired by Informatica, right? Also quite a parallel path in that perspective. And the masking platforms of Informatica was built on the foundation of what we have created in the past. And then 7 years ago, I left Informatica to build SecuPi, understanding the limitations of the existing feature-based platforms that were that were there in the market to address data security, as well as understanding the path that the industry is taking through the lens of GDPR, starting with GDPR, right? And then continuing with GDPR, PCI DSS and CMMC, TIPRA, Quebec Law 25. So many regulations are now being focused on data. Recently, also the solvency laws, data controls. If we're talking about data residency in Europe, SHREM 2, DORA regulation, but also Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, China. The list just goes on and on. So all of these regulations and requirements are imposing a different viewpoint on the data security challenges, and hence require a new platform. And going back in time, 7 years ago, I had foreseen those requirements piling up more and more. And the legacy approaches of let's put an agent on a database and hope for the good, right? They started to crumble under the requirements of those mega trends, and hence build SecuPi for that. And I'll share a slide that we have built that articulates that. Right? In the past, there were primarily the legacy DAM solution that Paul helped to bring to life. Primarily focusing the SOX compliance, and hence, because of SOX compliance, they were primarily focused on the privileged users on the DBAs accessing production databases to provide the reporting of who changed which information. And it was not really around even the monitoring, it's primarily around showing the changes that privileged users were performing on databases. But then I was creating the second generation of that through the dynamic masking DAM, the ability to dynamically mask access to sensitive data. DBA should not be able to see the CEO salary, right? DevOps accessing production databases should not be able to see the neighbor policy information or the health care information in a health organization. And to achieve that, not only that we are obliged to monitor access to data, we also need to take a more proactive stance, and starting with dynamic masking through the regulations of the GDPR, but also the need to comply with different requirements around the segregation of duties. We go to the era of the proactive DSP to really provide fine-grained access controls, not only dynamically masking access to certain PII columns or PHI columns, but even filtering row level. For example, hiding federal information from offshore teams to comply with CMMC, right? To comply with the federal requirements. Zero Trust now imposes the need to comply with single sign-on MFA on all tools and applications. How can we do it to our old SQL Plus running on Oracle, right? It doesn't support even single sign-on MFA. In addition, the security in depth concept requires to provide a password vault to the production databases in order to completely hide the production database password from privileged users. So all of these are additional features that have been required to address from the CIPRA, the GDPR, Safe Harbor, HIPAA compliant, offshoring, solvency laws, and all of those requirements compel organizations to drive more and more restricted access to sensitive data over and beyond what the legacy DAM have been providing over the years. Paul, any comments?
No, I mean, in that context too, Alon, meanwhile, the beat goes on in terms of the risk and the number of breaches that still go on. So the marketplace is definitely prime and ready for a solution that SecuPi, we developed at SecuPi, but also in terms of its ease of use and flexibility and all the other elements that sometimes people struggle with, especially with database activity monitoring. So
yeah. Also DSP, right? the DAM has been replaced with a new three-letter acronym called DSP. And this is something that I'm proud to say I've been working diligently with Gartner. DSP means Data Security Platform, which is also Gartner understanding that DAM needs now to reincarnate into something new, something more comprehensive. And hence Gartner has stopped defining the DAM as a market and has decided to define that as a new category called DSP, namely Data Security Platform. And the reason behind that is not only the data activity monitoring, right? It's over and beyond activity monitoring as required today, and hence also Gartner changed their viewpoint on them and how started to call it DSP, and hence the proactive DSP definition that we are putting here. Or SecuPi, of course, is the leading provider in that. By the way, to those of you who are also fixated around the zero trust, right? Also, even the zero trust have been taking a leap ahead into data-centric security. Now, in the past, zero trust was primarily focused around network security, microsegmentation, device-based access control, doing disk-level encryption. This is the old zero trust. But as was released in July 2022, the new zero trust architecture recommended by the US Department of Defense and the NSA now has become data-centric. And the elements that the zero trust now incorporates in the data-centric zero trust include the data tagging, classification, the dynamic data masking, attribute-based access control. Attribute-based access control means to add additional attributes except just the role when provisioning access to sensitive data. So that's why it's attribute-based access control, taking for example, a consideration of consent, location, citizenship, time of day. Other attributes need to be taken into consideration when provisioning access to sensitive data, even purpose, as an example. And then the DLP, and last but not least, the field and record level encryption. And so all of those that today are fragmented in encryption tools, masking tools, data monitoring tools, dynamic masking tools, right? Instead of having 3-4 different siloed tools to address all of those different requirements, even from the zero trust perspective, from this defense in depth concept, hence the new DSP, the new evolution of DAM incorporates all of those features together. And the way that we look at it is as follows. We look at it at 3 different layers. There's the first layer of the real-time monitoring with all the existing requirements around monitoring and auditing, DDL, DCL, and the need to identify threat detection, behavior analytics components, but also some few additional capabilities, such as production passwordless access to data. So all of these are the things that are included in the DAM category. But then on top of that, protection of the data in use come to mind, with the need to apply fine-grained access controls, right? The dynamic masking, as we've seen from the zero trust. And then on top of that, the protection of data at rest, with the need to apply masking, encryption, tokenization, and even deletion for right to be forgotten. Right? Even the deletion requirement of CIPRA, Quebec Law 25, PDPA, GDPR, etc., right? Even those compliance requirements should and can be addressed with the right DSP platform of choice, because the DSP now incorporates both the monitoring aspect, the protection of data in use, and the protection of data at rest in one platform. Another viewpoint of that is taking the persona viewpoint. In the past, we've primarily focused on the privileged users, the DevOps, the DBA, the admins, but now also analysts and data scientists have huge accessibility to sensitive data, which also needs to be restricted. Even business users through applications and offshore third party. So also when you tilt that and start to view on the challenge based on personas, you need to take the charge of data accessibility, applying different types of controls, as we talked in before. the controls of monitoring, tagging, alerting, controls of the masking and access control, controls of encryption, tokenization, and deletion. So when you look now at a different viewpoint from the persona viewpoint, now also an extended benefits can be driven from a DSP platform. An additional benefit driven by serving different personas. And this is also an interesting uplift of the value proposition that the DAM platform can provide large organizations. Any comments, Paul, on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I'm glad you showed this chart because as we talked about, it's important because in the context of the proliferation of artificial intelligence and the data scientists, analysts, and the large language models that are being developed from data sources, databases, the need for a platform really escalates dramatically, and there's no such greater example in the past few years. And having been on several CISO regional meetings the past year or so and listening to them, it is a real concern, and it's addressed with SecuPi. And secondly, knowing hundreds and hundreds of customers that have adopted DAM, and some of them early, some of them, more recent. One of the things that they struggle with is the requirement to have multiple tools. And the fact that Gartner recognizes it as a platform and has expanded what it is, and the fact that we at SecuPi have this type of offering that hits that is all really, really important for the marketplace and for the customers that are joining us today. So.
Great. Another thing that I'm sure both of us will relate is the challenge of service accounts, right? And service accounts have always been a huge blind spot for the database monitoring tools, simply because the way that the old approach was to put agents on databases, and now it's as they try to take this old approach and modernize it for cloud, they require you to turn on the native database logs in your 500 AWS RDS and 500 Azure SQL, right? And then they would crunch those logs after the fact, trying to find a needle in the haystack. And of course, with this old approach, agents on databases or just taking database logs, not only that you lose the proactive capabilities of alerting and blocking and masking access to sensitive data, really to provide a security by design concept, but also another thing that arises from this old approach is the limitation of understanding who's behind the service account. And this leads to one of the reasons that I founded SecuPi 7 years ago was because I realized that this limitation should be solved one way or the other, because more and more traffic, more and more access is done through APIs, through applications, through anonymous accounts, right? Especially when you talk about cloud applications. So how to solve this challenge at scale, and especially as the regulations, CIPRA, DORA, all of those regulations demand records of processing with observability over and beyond what a database collects, right? The rich context is super important for providing this defense in depth concept. And hence, to do that, in SecuPi, one of the options that we offer our customers is to put SecuPi even on the applications. Because in the past, the legacy DAM solutions were putting agents on the database servers, or just like today, they are taking logs from AWS RDS. What happened that when they are doing that, all traffic comes from service account, and the end users who's connecting through the application layers is completely hidden. So how can we apply zero trust? How can we actually monitor the end user activity if everything comes from this Linux box? Right? We lose the context. And one of the main reasons that we founded SecuPi 7 years ago was we understood that a different approach must be taken, and hence putting SecuPi on the application is very important, because once we have this observability on the application, understanding the user request, the user location, the user device, understanding the data request, SQL or API call or NoSQL request, the data response, what is the list of VIP clients that the user just received, and the user response, right? Collecting those 4 stages, understanding the rich context, and applying controls would really elevate the legacy DAM capabilities into the new era of compliancy, of security, of privacy requirements everywhere. And this was something that really was important for us to bring to the industry, this ability to simply plug in the SecuPi into even native cloud applications, on-prem applications, Linux and Unix boxes, in order to get this observability over and beyond the blindness of the service account. Any comments, Paul?
Yes, that's good. I mean, that's good from if I'm a customer using DAM or someone using DAM today, and all these various other tools, but also someone new who's interested in implementing it. To me, that concern around the service accounts, but also the user and being blind to it would basically undermines some of the security foundational stuff that you need in place. So these are, very, very key attributes for sure. Not to mention, and I'm sure you'll talk about this a little bit, not to mention the, how really implementing, but also operationally, there's a cost saving involved too, which would make a huge difference, let alone the reduction in risk and all.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to show participants who would never seen dynamic masking, right? Dynamic masking and fine-grained access control, it means that before you can see, your CEO salary, and by just turning on dynamic masking, now you see everything X out, right? And the Xing out is not limited only to, very few regular expression patterns. The dynamic masking can be automatically driven by a classification of all your PII, all your PHI data, right? Sometimes dynamic masking is misunderstood and thought that, it's just, let's define a regular expression that will switch text with a text. The problem with this old approach that is built on regular expression dynamic masking really, misses the purpose of that. Because how can you define a regular expression of a client name? How can you define a regular expression of your CEO data? Right? How can you apply a regular expression of salary or birth dates or locations? Right? It's impossible. And hence, a better mousetrap to identify the sensitive data and apply dynamic masking to any type of data type that we can also import from a data catalog or do the classification ourselves. We support both approaches, is very important. Right? And hence, when you think about dynamic masking, you need to double click on that, because there are different layers of dynamic masking. The old dynamic masking is very limited to regular expression, which really miss the purpose of protecting all type of client data to the different stakeholders. Right? You want to do dynamic masking, you want also to apply row level filtering, right? So VIP client data will also be hidden. You want also to completely hide federal information, right? To customers who still have that manage federal customers through the CMMC. Very important for offshore to outsource work as well. So this is also one of the major things of the identification is required. The identification both at rest, like I'm showing you here, when you access sensitive data, it should be anonymized, but also even dynamic masking and physical masking of data at rest. Scrambling names, hiding. Let me show a quick of the different options. right? When we talk about tokenization, form preserving encryption, these are also the identification functions. The difference between tokenization and encryption and masking is that encryption and tokenization are reversible, while masking is irreversible. Sometimes we would apply dynamic encryption even. Super valuable to apply dynamic encryption to comply with encryption requirements of large cyber insurance mandates. You know, every large organization today needs to report for cyber insurance. Cost is skyrocketing, and one of the way to reduce cyber insurance cost is by checking the box of encryption. One or the easiest way to check box the encryption is by using dynamic encryption to the privileged users. It's a very easy way to apply to comply with the encryption requirements of insurance, cyber insurance, by doing that. But this is just the beginning, right? We need also to apply bucketing for the likes of HIPAA and Safe Harbor. So we would bucket people over the age of 70, right? Or we'll bucket ages. Dynamic masking, right? Applying the identification of certain elements of the name, or social security number, email, etc. Replacing zeroing, but also obfuscation. We can obfuscate names. Something in addition that would be important is both the form preserving masking, that even masking can keep a certain format, randomization of the masking. But last and not least is the types of encryption, where we can even take, for example, a date. This is something important when you talk about encryption. There are two types of encryption. There are the format preserving encryption, where it keeps the format, right? So, for example, 23rd 0287, 38 of the 13 0066 is the same format. Okay, but this is Roman Empire. Nobody was born in the Roman Empire era, right? So this would be invalid for a date type, which means that you really cannot use format preserving encryption and still keep the date type column. We have invested a lot of time and effort for our global 2000 customers also to provide types of encryption that you can take, for example, a date or an integer and encrypt it while keeping the type. So a date will keep also a date with a certain time range. When you encrypt an integer, the encrypted value will still be an integer. That's very important, as you need consistency applying the identification across different databases, data sets, on-prem and in the cloud. All of these are, again, elements of this forward-thinking platform that now Garden coins as DSP. Paul, any comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a couple things. The platform where it keeps coming up and up again, and that's one of the things that caught my eye about SecuPi several months ago, when quietly SecuPi is really grown and established a presence worldwide, and here in the United States is growing significantly as well. But I think back, and many who are joining us today might live in this world where even in my IBM days, the data masking product was under the same roof, so to speak, but not under the same umbrella. It was totally different, operated totally differently, wasn't part of a platform, would sell as one, but wasn't part of one. And that, to me, is a huge plus for SecuPi from a user perspective. So very, very impressive approach to all of that being packaged up together along.
Yeah. Another thing that would be important to mention is how can it be done, right? What's the technology under the hood? And the idea behind that is when we built SecuPi, right, we always thought about a centralized control. The centralized control must be available on premise. Right? Most organizations still have a huge assets deployed on prem, whether this is the mainframe, Oracle, SQL Server, right? But also be able to take the same central management server and deploy it as a Kubernetes cluster on AWS, Azure, GCP, right? Supporting AKS, EKS, JKE, etc. And this multi-faceted approach of a simple deployment wherever data lives, wherever you need to apply the controls, is very important. Another notion that we wanted to implement in SecuPi was the openness. Right? We have different identity sources that we would like to pull context from. For example, location of the user, citizenship, role of the user. So we need integrations with different identity sources, pull the user role from SAP HR and his hierarchy, or pull his clearance level from Workday, or his location from Okta, right? So we want to pull attributes from those identity sources, combine them with data attribute sources, either using Colibra or Informatica or OneTrust or Purview or other data classification sources, and then defining policies that will match them together into a cohesive compliance posture. And this is something that we do by defining policies such as a privileged user should not be able to see PHI information, right? Or somebody in the Swiss office must not be able to see information of US employees and vice versa to address sovereignty laws. So those policies would be then defined and everything would be pushed down to different set of enforcers. And the magic of SecuPi is the fact that we provide a breadth of enforcement options. And those enforcement options give us the ability to provide full support both to the legacy DB2s and Oracle and Teradata and Exadata. And as data is moving more and more to cloud, supporting also the likes of RDS and Azure SQL, the Mongos, the Snowflake, the Databricks of the world. In addition, not only to provide the different data platform support, but even provide the ability to control ingestion flows. When we're lifting data from our mainframe and Oracle and SQL Server, we want the ability to put a plugin on those ingestion tools to encrypt data that we're lifting from our on-premise data sources, maybe to Snowflake or Databricks or Redshift, as well as control all accessibility performed by privileged users to the different DirectDB tools. Right? And we do that by providing the organization with 5 different options. And as we serve Global 2000 customers, options are very important because some customers prefer the transparent gateway approach, some of them prefer the agent-based approach, some of them prefer the agentless approach. And with those 5 different options, we're able to serve highly regulated organizations with huge amount of IT assets spread across their on-prem and cloud. Any comments, Paul?
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on some key aspects. I think that's important to the customer marketplace, especially those in CISOs and information security folks, et cetera. The next thing I think touching base on would be the implementation of this, and if we can talk a little bit about that, I think I'd like to weigh in as we talk through that as well, because I think that's going to be a lot of questions in people's minds, because it is such a comprehensive platform and effective platform, and love to talk about that for a minute if we can, Nolan.
Sure. So the way that we think about implementation is doing that in phases, so we can introduce more and more functionality and introduce the platform to more and more personas, right? We talked about different personas. We talked about even different compelling events, the regulations, the sovereignty laws, the data security requirements. Right? So the way that we believe we can slice and dice it is, right, we can start with the privileged users accessing data through their DirectDB tools and do it without any database agents. Right? Very important. We do not need any database agents to be configured. If I have like 2,000 AWS RDSs and still 500 Oracle databases on-prem, I do not need to put any agents on those databases. I don't need to turn on the 500 native database logs in my AWS environment and pay a lot of money for AWS to do that and incur the costs of turning on legacy logs, native logs. And hence, the ability to put SecuPi on the privileged users and start there. So wherever they connect to, wherever I'm connecting with my SQL Pass and Toad and SQL Developer and SQL Server Management Studio, etc., and dbeaver and other more cloud DirectDB tools, the controls and the monitoring comes with it. It is built on top of the DirectDB tool, or we can simply use a set of transparent gateways, right? Whatever the customer may prefer. Then we can take a next step on the implementation and do data classification of the data. So we can detect in those 500 Oracle and 500 AWS RDS the thousands of sensitive columns, the PII columns, the PHI columns, the PCI columns, and then at phase 2, define restrictive policies that every privileged user accessing those sensitive columns, we should dynamically mask them and we should restrict them on a need-to-know basis. And then we can even apply this dynamic encryption tokenization on accessibility to the data. So we can gradually grow from a basic monitoring functionality, monitoring UBA on our privileged users, and then expand that to more of a zero trust security by design concept, applying dynamic masking, restricting access based on column, row, and cell level. And last and not least, even applying extensive de-identification functionality through the means of encryption and masking into certain data sets out there. And as data moves more and more from on-prem to the cloud, as well as from cloud to AI platforms, ability to monitor access to sensitive data sets by Snowflake or Redshift or by Databricks or different AI models that will be polling data, accessing data in a certain data set, and managing those accessibility through the life cycle of the data. And this can be done, again, with no changes to our databases, with no network changes, right? Requires, in this perspective, a gradual growth as we can expand the platform in more and more privileged users, extend to more and more critical applications and cloud analytics based on the risk, appetite, the priorities of the CIO, the CISO, and even the board. Any comments, Paul?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent perspective on the disciplined approach to implementation that SecuPi takes in every project that you undertake. Because having been in the market and in the technology business for a long time, I always like to put myself in the client's shoes too. And when you're approaching this critical issue of security around the data, the discipline that's applied in managing the implementation of it is key to the success of the project, number one. And number two, doing it properly helps reduce costs effectively, both from an implementation perspective, but also from a going forward perspective of maintaining a comprehensive and excellent solution like this. So good stuff for sure we have.
And last and not least, these are really the benefits that we see at our customers. Right? The first and foremost is the cost reduction and efficiency, as we do not need to put agents on databases, we do not need to turn on the database logs, we do not need those dozens of appliances that would be used as collecting and aggregating data. All of these allow us to both reduce the overall cost of the solution, as well as even reduce the manpower required to administer and to maintain the solution. The ability to meet ever-growing compliance requirements, but not buying a new tool and implementing a new tool, right? And going through the gates of ever increasing our complexity. Here with one platform, we can address both the existing compliance requirements around data, as well as the future ones. As we mentioned, the ability to even apply encryption and tokenization, the ability to apply masking, the ability to apply deletion for CIPRA, the ability to enforce sovereignty laws. All of these are future-looking regulations that such a platform can provide. And last but not least, the defense in depth, the ability to prevent breaches with this platform through the ability to enforce single sign-on MFA, passwordless access to the data, behavior analytics on the data, overcoming the service account blindness. Right? We are able to increase the zero trust posture of an organization with single platform. Yeah. Any last comments, Paul, before we complete the session?
Yeah, you mentioned Gartner earlier, and talking about the platform approach that we have at SecuPi. Also, too, I just want to make mention of the way they viewed the company and the solution, in that top tier, which I think is hugely important to the people that are joining us today and to the marketplace too. So it's not just SecuPi talking about it; it's about the customers implementing and utilizing it, and what the industry analysts are saying about it as well. I think those are important factors to kind of put a bow on things too.
So, Paul, thank you very much for hosting this webinar with me. As always, it's a pleasure doing that with you. And for everybody in the audience, don't hesitate to reach out to us through our sales@secupi.com, or to me or to Paul directly, and be happy to continue this discussion with you and be able to serve you for those security, privacy, and compliance requirements over time. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thanks for everybody for joining. Bye-bye now.